So with our attention now focused on both Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza, it's very easy to be distracted from other parts of the world that are also trouble areas that need watching. And one such area is the West Balkans. This is an area that emerged from the breakup of Yugoslavia, and old rivalries, religious conflicts, and the draw toward the Western democracy versus Russian and autocracy continue to plague the region. We have a very distinguished guest and my friend, April Foley, who will try to help us understand what's going on, the importance of this region to democracy and the Western world, how it's developing, its challenges, and our challenges with that as well. So let me give you a little bit of background on my speaker. Forgive me for sort of reading this, but I don't want to miss anything on her. April is a woman who has, in a sense, done it all. She's been a business leader, a diplomat, and a not-for-profit leader. She is someone who gives of the heart in everything that she does, and I speak firsthand on this. April served as United States ambassador to Hungary from 2006 to 2009. And during her tenure, Hungary entered the visa waiver program, and NATO decided to open a heavy wing aircraft program in Hungary's Chappaqua airbase. Hungary significantly heightened its profile in Afghanistan, taking on the leadership of a PRT, Provincial Reconstruction Team. Prior to serving as U.S. Ambassador to Hungary, she was appointed to be the first vice president and vice chairman of the Export-Import Bank of the U.S. She was one of 6 Americans on the U.S.-Iraq Joint Economic Council, which laid plans for strengthening the economic performance of Iraq. She worked on the creation of the Trade Bank of Iraq, and she worked with the Minister of Finance of Afghanistan to create a development strategy that laid the groundwork for foreign direct investment. Prior to her roles in the U.S. government, she had an extensive career in professional management. She worked 17 years as an executive for Pepsi in roles including strategic planning, financial management, and mergers and acquisitions. Her efforts resulted in the acquisition of Kentucky Fried Chicken. At Reader's Digest, she spearheaded efforts to diversify the business away from the very mature product line. And at Pfizer, she introduced annual planning at a new factory. After returning from Hungary, Ambassador Foley served on the corporate boards of 3 public corporations, Vista Outdoor, Alliant Tech Systems, and Xerium Technologies, and she currently serves on the board of the East Northfield Water Company. This is a lady who is traveling all the time. In addition to her business experience, Ambassador Foley has held significant volunteer leadership positions. She currently chairs the Hungary Foundation, which funds education and cultural exchanges between the U.S. and Hungary. She also chairs C4ADS, a not-for-profit intelligence organization which uses cutting-edge technology to track international illicit networks. And she served on the Smith College Board of Trustees, where she chaired its investment committee. Because she lives locally, and this is wonderful for us, she has also shared her experience and expertise on the boards of United Way of Westchester and Putnam, and also in many other ways. She is also a volunteer at the Women's Correctional Facility in Bedford Hills. So as you can see, her expertise, her giving is very broad. She holds a BA from Smith College, MBA from Harvard, and she is a mom of 3 grown children and grandmother. So without further ado, let me introduce Ambassador April Foley.
Thank you, June. And June didn't mention that she and I went to Smith College together back in the day. And so and have known each other for many years. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for Zooming in. As June said, today I want to talk about the West Balkans. I think the map that you see on your screen is probably the full Balkans, but we're just going to be talking about the western portion. Many of us think of the Balkans as a leafy green mountainous region with peaceful seascapes and between Austria and Hungary on the north and Greece on the south. And while it is all of that, the history of the Balkans has been anything but peaceful. It's been filled with brutal, blood-soaked battles, sweeping migrations, ethnic cleansing, and bitter struggles for power. So my focus today will be threefold. First, I'll start with a historical backdrop to give you a little context. Then I'll move on to the breakup of Yugoslavia, which was calamitous. And third, I'll discuss the current progress towards Westernization. So let's start with a brief history. The West Balkans have always been lands pulled between East and West. Both Venice and Constantinople were huge east-west trading hubs. The Adriatic coast is sprinkled with ports of call for these trade routes. Even today, images of the winged lion, which is the ancient symbol of Venice, are everywhere along the Adriatic coast. During much of the first millennium, the region was predominantly Christian. In 1054, there was a schism in the Christian church that resulted in two branches, the Eastern Orthodox, headquartered in Constantinople, and the Roman Catholic, headquartered in modern-day Italy. In the 11th and 12th centuries, the Muslim religion began to spread. In 1453, Byzantine Christian Constantinople fell to the Muslim Ottomans. So the Ottoman Turks developed expansionist ambitions in Europe, and they began to move up the Balkan Peninsula. In 1389, Serbia lost the Battle of Kosovo to the Turks. Subsequently, the Ottoman Empire controlled much of the Balkans for upwards of 400 to 500 years, ending in the late 19th and early 20th century. Today, Turkish influence remains noticeable in the region. For example, Albania and Kosovo are both 80 to 90% Muslim, and Bosnia is over 50% Muslim. The Ottoman Empire declined and completely collapsed in 1921. Unfortunately, communism took hold of the Balkans for much of the 20th century. So the region went from one form of authoritarian rule under the Turks to another under communism. In Albania, Enver Hoxha ruled for 41 years. He was originally a Stalinist, and he implemented a lot of communist measures. But then after a falling out with Stalin, he became a Maoist known for his brutal tactics. He implemented state atheism. He outlawed private ownership. He outlawed traveling abroad. His government imprisoned, executed, and exiled thousands of Albanians. The Albanian economy under Hoxha was extremely poor. He was an oppressive dictator. Yugoslavia was formed in 1918. Yugoslavia consisted of today's 7 countries, which you can see on the map, of Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Kosovo, and North Macedonia. Its leader, Yugoslavia's leader, was Josip Broz, commonly known as Tito. Tito was also a communist. Tito began as an acolyte of Stalin as well, and then he fell out with him. Tito liked his independence. He ended up supporting a more decentralized federation in order to keep ethnic tensions under control. Although it was a communist regime, It was a much lighter variety of communism than that of Albania. And because he was not aligned with Stalin, Tito maintained productive relations with the US throughout his reign. And unlike Albania, the local economy was reasonably healthy under Tito. Tito ruled Yugoslavia for 36 years until 1980. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell and communism collapsed all over Europe, including in the Balkans. So with that historical backdrop, let me move to part two, which is the breakup of Yugoslavia. So Serbia fought hard. Serbia, which is the largest of these states, both in population and in geographic size, Serbia fought hard to keep Yugoslavia united, but most Balkan countries wanted independence and democracy. So 3 bloody and bitter wars of independence were fought throughout the 1990s and the 2000s. The Croatian War, the Bosnian War, and the Kosovo War. Each Yugoslav country had a slightly different path to independence. So let me talk a bit about each of them. Starting at the top with Slovenia, although Slovenia doesn't have a color on this map, it was actually part of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was the first to declare independence in 1991. Slovenia was probably the most Western of the Yugoslav states. It had been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it was ethnically homogeneous, which is important in this part of the world, predominantly Roman Catholic and Slavic. Turkic influence was negligible in Slovenia. So after 10 days, only 10 days of a relatively bloodless war, Slovenia's independence was achieved. Croatia was next. It actually declared independence on the same day as Slovenia. Croatia is also largely Roman Catholic and formally part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so quite Western. However, the Krajina region of Croatia was inhabited heavily by Serbs, who are predominantly Orthodox Christian and use the Cyrillic alphabet. The Serbs were adamant about retaining the Krajina region of Croatia. And so the Croatian War broke out immediately and lasted 4 years. UN peacekeeping forces were quickly brought in, and after that, fighting became intermittent, but there was still no real peace. Then in 1995, Croatia launched 2 major offensives that won them the war. However, in the process, 20,000 people were killed and 300,000 people were displaced, 300,000. So this means that massive numbers of Croats who lived in Serbia fled to Croatia and vice versa. In the midst of this upheaval, robberies, rapes, killings, imprisonments, and tortures were prevalent. The International War Crimes Tribunal convicted leaders on both sides of atrocities. Next was Bosnia. After a referendum, Bosnia and Herzegovina seceded from Yugoslavia in March of 1992. Now, Bosnian independence was far more complicated because Bosnia has no ethnic group, no majority ethnic group. Bosnia contains Muslims, Croats, and Serbs, all in large proportions. So the referendum was favored by Muslims and Croats living in Bosnia, but it was boycotted by Serbians living in Bosnia.
Ladies.
Serbians living in Bosnia quickly created the independent autonomous state of Republika Srpska. The Second Balkan War broke out immediately after this. The Yugoslav National Army quickly armed the Republika Srpska, and international outrage boiled over due to Serbian war crimes and atrocities. At the center of the outrage was the Srebrenica massacre, in which 7,000 Muslim men were slaughtered. It was the worst mass murder in Europe since World War II. In addition, 20,000 civilians were expelled from this town. These acts were later ruled by the International War Crimes Tribunal to be genocide. The Dayton Accords, negotiated by US Special Envoy Richard Holbrooke, served to end the fighting in Bosnia and formally establish Republika Srpska as a political sub-state with no right to secession. The Dayton Accords were signed by the presidents of Croatia, Serbia, and Bosnia in 1995. The Bosnian War resulted in 100,000 deaths and 3 million displaced people. So you've probably heard the term ethnic cleansing. So ethnic cleansing is the systematic removal of certain ethnic groups from an area with the intent of making a region ethnically homogeneous. So ethnic cleansing is what was happening in the region in the 1990s. War triggered sweeping mass migrations on the Balkan Peninsula. North Macedonia in 1992 declared its independence peacefully after a referendum, thankfully. Next was Montenegro. For many years, actually, Montenegro was committed to remaining united with Serbia in a Serbia-Kosovo-Albania confederation. However, in 2006, they finally decided to have a referendum on the idea of independence, and the referendum passed. However, it passed by a very slim majority. And at that time, then Montenegro declared independence peacefully. However, on my trip to Montenegro in September, I learned that Montenegrins are beginning to have second thoughts. They are beginning to discuss rejoining Serbia, largely due to economic considerations and their very tiny population of only 600,000 people. The final country to declare independence from Yugoslavia was Kosovo. Kosovo used to be heavily Serbian, but due to various Albanian migrations, 90% of the population of Kosovo is now ethnic Albanian Muslims. The remaining 10% are Serbian Orthodox Christians, Serbs. They're Serbian Orthodox Serbs. Kosovo is particularly sensitive for Serbia because it includes sites of great historic and religious significance. So, for example, Kosovo houses the seat of the Serbian Orthodox Mother Church, as well as its most significant monasteries. In 1389, the Battle of Kosovo looms large in the national identity of Serbia due to the heroic valiance in fighting off the Turks. Kosovo is also the site of the Serbian victory over the Turks in 1912. So bottom line, the Serbians object to the fact that Muslim Albanians are in control of sites that are deemed to be sacred to the Serbs. In 1996, tensions began to develop. The Kosovo Liberation Army formed as a kind of rebel band. It began randomly attacking Serbian police and politicians. And by 1998, the situation escalated to an armed uprising. Serbian police tried to regain control, but they committed atrocities in the process and triggered waves of refugees fleeing the region. So at this point, the US, Great Britain, Germany, France, Italy, and Russia responded by forming the contact group. So the contact group demanded an immediate ceasefire, withdrawal of Serbian forces, the return of refugees, and international monitoring. So while Serbia's leader at the time, Slobodan Milosevic, agreed to the terms, he failed to implement them. As a result, the Kosovo Liberation Army regrouped and renewed its attacks. And then Serbia attempted to drive all ethnic Albanians out of Kosovo, all ethnic Albanians. They fled in masses to Albania, Macedonia, and Montenegro. Then in 1999, NATO got involved. NATO began airstrikes against Serbia. 11 weeks of bombing were conducted that eventually led to the bombing of Serbia's capital, Belgrade. In June of 1999, NATO and Yugoslavia finally signed a peace accord that called for the withdrawal of Serbian troops in 2008. However, as a result, the majority of Serbs left Kosovo. Today, Kosovo remains unfinished business. Kosovo declared its independence from Serbia in 2008. However, only 101 of the United Nations 193 countries recognized Kosovo. And today, Serbia claims that 8 of the 101 have since rescinded their recognition. So in many cases, the countries that have declined to recognize Kosovo have their own issues with breakaway regions, like Spain and the Basque Country. In fact, 5 European countries do not recognize Kosovo. So this leaves Kosovo in a rather undefined state at the moment. The government of Serbia does not want to grant independence to Kosovo unless the Serbs who live in a small sliver of northern Kosovo are granted a high degree of autonomy and protection from ethnic cleansing that has been so pernicious in the region. Multiple attempts have been made by Serbia and Kosovo to normalize relations. In February of this year, and February and March of this year, the European Union mediated negotiations between Serbia's president, Aleksandar Vučić, and Kosovo's Prime Minister, Albin Kurti. And just to add a little bit of context here, Kosovo's Albin Kurti is one of the original revolutionary leaders of the Kosovo Liberation Army. So this year's negotiations resulted in the Ohrid Agreement, which was verbally accepted by both leaders, but it was signed by neither. So the term constructive ambiguity has been used to describe this agreement, meaning that it uses ambiguous language on sensitive issues to advance political purposes. Right now, there are frequent provocations in the Serbia-Kosovo border region. In May, more than 30 NATO peacekeeping soldiers were injured in clashes. Kosovo attempted to take over local government buildings in the Serbian region after an election that was deemed invalid. Secretary of State Tony Blinken responded angrily to Kosovo, quote, these actions have sharply and unnecessarily escalated tensions and will have consequences for our bilateral relations with Kosovo. Then on September 23rd, just a month ago, a Kosovo police officer and 3 Serbian gunmen were killed in a firefight at a Serbian Orthodox monastery in northern Kosovo. Serbia subsequently began staging military equipment on its border. On September 29th, Secretary Blinken called on Serbia to de-escalate. And from the White House, Jake Sullivan pressured Kosovo's Albin Kurti to implement the Ohrid Agreement, which he had failed to do. Serbia's president also asked NATO to replace the police in the region of northern Kosovo with NATO peacekeepers, which I think is probably a good idea. So yes, today Kosovo remains unfinished business. And unfortunately, Kosovo is not the only trouble spot in the former Yugoslavia. Bosnia also remains unstable. There continue to be problems with the Republika Srpska, which is, as you recall, the semi-autonomous Serbian region within Bosnia. Trafficking and criminality are rampant. Its president, Milorad Dodik, has been compared to a mafia boss. He has been sanctioned by the US. He has threatened to break away from Bosnia and become an independent nation. He has repudiated Bosnian institutions. He has violated key tenets of the Dayton Peace Accords. He has strengthened relations with Russia. He is a significant contributor to the instability of Bosnia. So in summarizing part 2, after the fall of communism in 1989, Yugoslavia fell into chaos. Slobodan Milosevic tried to preserve unity, but those efforts were unsuccessful. 3 bloody wars ensued, and while independence has been achieved for all former Yugoslav states except Kosovo, there continue to be troubling ethnic tensions which prevent the region from achieving its ultimate goal, and that is to be integrated with the West. So now I want to switch gears and move to part 3, which is, in spite of the bad breakup of Yugoslavia, all of the Balkan states view their future with the West. And there has been some solid progress, even though there remain some vexing challenges. So let's talk about Westernization. For most countries who want to Westernize, the first step is joining the NATO alliance. NATO membership provides security. Article 5 of the NATO alliance states that an armed attack against any NATO member is an armed attack against all of them. So any aggressor country is going to think twice about attacking a NATO member because it will draw the full military might of the entire 30-nation alliance. The second priority for Westernizing states is to join the EU, the European Union. The European Union is an alliance that facilitates economic and political integration. It is key to economic development and prosperity. So where do the Balkans stand? Well, at this point, Slovenia and Croatia in the far north are the only 2 Western Balkan countries who are members of both the NATO alliance and the European Union, and which both of them joined in 2004. Both are experiencing high levels of economic growth and rapid integration, and both are really Balkan success stories at this point. NATO is playing a key role in preparing the remaining Balkan countries for integration with the West. NATO is based on the common values of individual liberty, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So NATO has been extremely helpful in restoring the war-ravaged Balkan states and infusing Western values. Albania, Montenegro, and North Macedonia have all joined the NATO alliance. And although the defense budgets of each of these countries are small, the level of enthusiasm is high. So that leaves Serbia, Bosnia, and Kosovo, who are not NATO members. Because of the bombings during the 1990s, many Serbs and Bosnians are still angry at NATO. Even so, both Bosnia and Serbia are now in NATO's Partnership for Peace program, which puts them on the path for NATO membership. It assists participants in making defense reforms, and it enables the countries to cooperate militarily with individual NATO members. Because Kosovo is not formally recognized by NATO members, and it remains occupied by NATO forces, NATO membership is not possible for Kosovo. While NATO has laid solid groundwork for Westernization, less progress has been made in getting the Balkan states into the European Union. All West Balkan states view EU membership as the key to a better future. So the last two countries to get in were Slovenia and Croatia in 2004. The Balkan states are having difficulty in meeting EU criteria for entry. The European Union requires a stable democratic government that respects the rule of law, and many of the Balkan states are poorly equipped to launch sophisticated constitutional democracies. Their history has not prepared them for it. They have not had the experience of democratic self-governance. Previous governments were authoritarian, autocratic, and frequently brutal. Individual freedom was severely limited. Civil society was weak or non-existent. Many Balkan leaders are finding that it is extremely challenging to overcome the mindsets of the authoritarian past. In addition, it is very difficult for very small, very poor countries to afford the robust governmental institutions and muscular civil society that are cornerstones of democracy. 4 of the 7 West Balkan states have fewer than 3 million people. So it's just hard to support a presidency, a parliament, a judiciary, a military, not to mention a diplomatic corps, when you have fewer than 3 million people who are poor. So decades of communism, followed by years of war and ethnic strife, have meant that foreign direct investment has been very low. The young people have fled the region in large numbers. In fact, the brain drain is a huge problem that has been mentioned in every country I visited. Balkan countries do not provide young people with economic opportunities, so they emigrate in alarming numbers, causing significant population decline. In Albania is a good example. 30% of the country's GDP, gross domestic product, comes from remittances. So remittances are the payments that Albanians working outside of Albania send back to their families in Albania. So again, remittances comprise 30% of Albania's GDP. In May, I was in the Balkans and had discussions with a number of Balkan leaders. Corruption and criminal activity were mentioned repeatedly as critical issues. In the case of Albania, bribery and influence peddling plagued the court system from top to bottom. So the government took action. They forced all of its judges to resign. And this was an effort to clean house and get rid of an entrenched system of bribery. However, this solution severely impeded the court's ability to operate. The government simply could not find enough qualified judges to fill all the open slots. So court cases now languish for months without being adjudicated due to the lack of judges. EU membership requires a high-functioning judiciary branch of government. So that said, many Balkan states are official candidates to join the EU, even in spite of this. And this means basically that they have negotiated a list of actions that they need to satisfactorily complete in order to gain.
Hi, how are you?
In order to gain.
You want me to take this for you? You finished?
It's yours. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
However, the EU's appetite for expansion, the EU itself, its appetite for expansion has been mercurial. In many cases, countries have been EU candidates for many
Could
years.
somebody mute John? I think it's you.
Yeah,
I
could everybody
can't do
please
that.
mute-
I don't
mute-
have this screen.
Don, can
Somebody
you,
call him. Does
Oh,
anyone have his cell
he
phone?
can hear us, I think, probably. So just
Don, could you,
everybody
Don, can you
mute.
mute, please?
So for example, Serbia has been an EU candidate since 2012. It completed all of the requirements for entry, only to be told by the EU that it had decided on new additional requirements. Albania has been a candidate since 2014, and the EU generally attempts to raise the average disposable income to the range that is close to that of other EU member states. Albania's household income is only 25% of the EU average. Raising it would be a huge financial undertaking. So Westernization has some challenges, and in addition, and probably as somewhat as a result of EU ambivalence, both Russia and China are active in the region. Both countries are seeking greater influence in Europe, and the Balkans are an obvious target. Russia has been particularly active in Serbia. Russia emphasizes its common bonds with Serbia. They both use the Slavic language. They both use the Cyrillic alphabet. They are both Eastern Orthodox countries. Russia follows the activities of Balkan parliaments closely. When there are issues that come before the parliaments where there is a Russian interest, some countries claim, actually a number of countries claim, that Russian operatives bribe politicians to vote in the Russian interest. Election influence is another favorite activity of the Russians. Russia has tried to influence elections through cyber attacks and the use of fake news, much to the consternation of local politicians. Russia is active in the region in every energy and pipeline project under development. In spite of all this, however, Western Europe is the most important economic partner for the Balkans. Western Europe holds the most promise, for example, to Serbia for a prosperous economic future. And Serbia recognizes this, and Serbia is making significant infrastructure investments that will enable it to become more deeply integrated with Western Europe. It's investing in highways, rail lines, pipelines, electric grid interconnections, and energy infrastructure to connect it to Western Europe. Serbia is unlikely to throw in with the Russians to the exclusion of Western Europe. China is also active in the region. In many Balkan countries, China is regarded with respect. China has been a significant investor through its Belt and Road Initiative. It's financing major infrastructure projects, and it's actively planning for more, as we saw in last week's conference, or maybe it was the week before in China. China is viewed as a friendly country. Unlike the EU and Europe, and unlike the US and Europe, who are constant critics of the Balkan states, China does not publicly criticize the Balkan countries. China is easier to work with. That said, there is some wariness about China's creating debt traps. Now, here's what I mean. China identifies Belt and Road projects that are much needed and politically attractive, but sometimes the debt becomes a problem. Montenegro is probably the best example of the debt trap. China offered to build a motorway in the mountains of Montenegro, all the way down to the sea. However, annual repayment costs were purportedly over 50% of Montenegro's GDP. So in other words, they were unaffordable. In the end, the government of Montenegro begged the EU to help bail them out. Other West Balkan countries are very much aware of what happened to Montenegro with China. So in the end, while China would like to have a European footprint and the Balkans are an available target, China has other targets of investment activities that are far larger and more promising economically. It's currently more focused on resource-rich Asian, African, and South American countries than it is in the tiny Balkan states. So the bottom line for my remarks today is that the future of the Balkans lies with the West. There are many obstacles to Westernization. Democracy and freedom have not been experienced by these countries historically, and cultural change is hard. It will take many decades for them to fully get there. In the meantime, both the US and the EU are determined to support Balkan Westernization efforts. And today's Balkan leaders are working hard to overcome the obstacles and attitudes that prevent their countries from fully integrating. Thank you.
Oh.
June, I'll turn it back to you.
Oh, thank you. April, you've covered a lot of territory, I think, and given us a much better understanding of the region, and I think sort of also the hope that eventually it will become more integrated with the West. It seems like it will be a long path for stability in that region. What are the things that the United States and the EU are doing, that particularly the US, that are sort of helping that roadway in ensuring that it doesn't turn toward Russia or I think chaos in many ways?
Right. Well, I mean, certainly the NATO alliance is very active in the region. And as you saw, many of the countries are currently part of the NATO alliance. And as a result of their presence in the region, that is in fact, a stabilizing factor. And also, like I mentioned in my remarks, that the NATO alliance carries with it, it's an alliance of values. It's not just a military alliance. It's about democratic values. It's about helping countries stabilize and reform and undergo reforms that will enable them to operate more like Western countries. It teaches them about democracy. It teaches them about democratic institutions. I would also say that the US is active in supporting the region. There have been a number of grants that have come through USAID that are aimed at educating people about democratic institutions. They are aimed at creating civil society. Civil society was virtually non-existent in this part of the world for centuries, really. And yet in our country, as we know, it's absolutely critical to the effective functioning of democracy. And so there have been lots of USAID funds aimed at stimulating the creation of civil society. The US has been involved in, overseeing elections to make sure that they are fair and so on. So yeah, there are a variety of ways in which they're active. The US is also trying to encourage foreign direct investment in the region. And I think Croatia and Slovakia have certainly been very successful recipients of lots of US foreign direct investment. It's been tougher in some of the other regions. So yes, I think probably one of the most important things for me that I realized is that the US is now, maybe even because of the interest of Russia and China and the way that Russia and China are trying to create inroads into the region, the US has stepped up its efforts to Westernize the region and instill Western values.
What has been the impact of the Ukraine war on that area?
It's been very difficult. It's been extremely difficult. because of the communist past of this region. Most of the energy coming into the region has been Russian. It's been Russian energy dominating it, and so they, with the with sanctions, that has, there was a rejiggering of the Russian energy and of energy resources and so on, and they continue to be rejiggering the energy patterns there. But it's not only energy. Energy is not the only pattern. There has been a disruption of trade patterns. So during the Soviet era, there was a lot of trade between Russia and the Balkan Peninsula. So, and this is agricultural trade, like wheat and apples and pigs and poultry products. And now with sanctions, it's been very damaging to the local farmers to cut off these trade exchanges for them. And as far as the European Union goes, it's more difficult to conduct trade with the European Union. They have a lot more, since these countries are mostly not part of the European Union. The European Union has some protective regulations that make it more difficult for Balkan countries to export poultry or pigs or things like that. So yeah, it's been damaging. Another element for Serbia that has been difficult is that Serbia has a healthy military equipment business, and so that, and Russia has been historically one of its largest trade partners on that. And so with the war in Ukraine, that has been curtailed dramatically. So.
Well,
So
just listening to you, and you would give the positives and then say, however.
Right. It's complicated. Yeah.
It is, yeah. In the world of the howevers, where do you see the greatest vulnerability in the Balkans? What's the biggest risk to their westernization?
Right now, I view the biggest risk as the friction between Kosovo and Serbia. And number one, and number two, the tensions between the Republika Srpska in Bosnia, this sub-state within Bosnia, and the rest of Bosnia. Both of those are very unstable situations, but at the moment, the most unstable situation is, as I mentioned, is the Serbian border between Kosovo, and where is a significant Serbian population in the very northern part of Kosovo. And so that, I think, as you heard, I mean, both the White House through Jake Sullivan of the NSC and Blinken are actively trying to, beat up the leaders of Serbia and Kosovo and make them toe the line. They're desperately really seeking to prevent this from turning into open warfare. And as you could see with these there, while I was there, while I was in Kosovo, I visited one of the Camp Bondsteel, which is one of the NATO military camps within Kosovo. And what they described to us was that there are constant provocations on the border where each side is trying to provoke the other side into taking an action that will justify them taking an action and basically kind of going to war.
Is Kosovo in any position to take on Serbia? Because they only have, what did you say, 3 million people?
Yeah, Kosovo only has 1.9 million people, and Serbia has 7 million. It's No, they're not, but you know, that hasn't prevented wars in this region.
Oh, I mistakenly went to logic and I shouldn't have done that.
This is we're in an emotional territory here that relates to ethnic tensions. And interestingly, it's not, some people think of that as being religious tensions, but it's more ethnic than religion. So the Kosovars are Albanian Muslims, and the Albanians are not a Slavic people. The Albanians are an Illyrian people. That's what their roots are. They are not Slavic like the rest of Yugoslavia. And there are tensions between those groups. But also, as I mentioned, there are these real sensitivities just in that northern region of Kosovo are where all these really important historical and Serbian historical and religious sites are that have an enormous role in the hearts and identity of Serbians. And those are in Kosovo. I mean, it would be as if all of a sudden, let's say Iran took over the Statue of Liberty. You know, that wouldn't fly too well. Anyway, yes.
Hi, Tyler.
Yes, hi, April, and thank you so
Hi.
much for a very comprehensive review of that part of the world. I was curious, to what extent is Serbia particularly dependent on Russian oil and gas, and to what extent can Russia twist arms in that particular area in terms of energy supply? Because they don't produce much energy on their own, if I recall correctly.
That's correct. And up until recently, most of their oil and gas came from Russia. However, even since the Ukraine war, there has been a great effort on the part of these states to, Serbia is actively building pipelines in order to bring up gas and oil, both from Turkey. And, you know, Turkey gets a lot of, Turkey has a lot of connections with Azerbaijan. They have the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, and they have another Southern Corridor pipeline. And so those pipelines are being built and brought up into the Balkans. And so that's changing, but they are still, and, you know, part of what's happening, you know, oil and gas, you know, I think there's a lot of mixing going on right now that kind of disguises Russian gas and oil, and it's not all clear. But the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that there has been decided progress in these states. Vučić has been particularly active in trying to diversify his source of energy and reduce the influence of energy in reduce his dependency on Russia in the region.
Yeah. That's Serbia you're referring to.
Serbia, yes.
Yeah.
He's trying very hard, and I know a lot of people think that Serbia is very close to Russia, and you know, it continues to have to buy its energy products, a portion of them, and a significant portion still, from Russia. So it needs to retain productive and functional working relations with Russia. But let there be no mistake, Vučić has his eye on the ball, and he knows it's about the European Union. That's where his future lies.
Yeah, I'm sure that makes Mr. Putin happy, yeah?
Yeah, no. Or that it makes Putin even more, try to be even more aggressive in elections and in, you know, fake news and playing games.
Yeah. Thank you.
Peter.
Yes, April, thank you for all those good comments. You mentioned the importance of remittances by the expatriate community from countries in the region. And
Yeah,
I'd like to ask you, are you aware of anyone really trying to do research or evaluate the impact of the immigrants from these countries who turn around and do have the opportunity to invest in places like Croatia and others, and also whether we see some of them coming back to be political leaders. On the economic front, I remember late Bob Ben Moshe, who went back to Croatia after leading metropolitan life here in the U.S., a very distinguished business.
yes. Yes to both. There is both money going back in the form of investments from Albanians who are investing in businesses like wineries and in Kosovo, in Kosovo and Albania, in spite of being, heavily 90% Muslim, they're big wine countries. And, what I found in general is that the people in the Balkan regions wear their religion quite lightly. You don't see women in the hijab. Many Muslims drink wine, local wines, very happily. You do hear the call to prayers. There are the mosques, but it's not as intense as you would see in Istanbul, for example. But yes, the people come back. And so, for example, I was in Pristina, the capital of Kosovo, and the current mayor of Pristina is a Kosovan who had left Kosovo, got his education in the UK, became an architect there, had an architect practice there, and then a bunch of politicians from Kosovo went up and said, "We need you to run for mayor of Pristina." And so he very reluctantly agreed, telling his wife, who is British, "Look, there's no way I'm going to win, so I'll accommodate them." Well, he won, and he is now the mayor of Pristina. So yes, there are a lot. There's a great effort to try to bring Albanians back, and also to get investment dollars in these countries. I mean, last week I had lunch in New York with an Albanian man who is the head of the Council of Albanian Ambassadors. He was an Albanian ambassador, and he was meeting with various financial people to raise money for tourism projects on the Albanian coast, which, so there are a lot of, Marriott dollars and US dollars going back into the region. And the Albanians are very, they're very active in that. They're very active in trying to get that investment to take place. So that's a good thing. And getting people to move back as well. I mean, there are many cases of Albanians who left and went back. And because that ethnic migration really, people fled their homes, and a lot of people want to go back and at least claim their property rights and so on, which is sometimes very, very difficult process, in fact, but yeah.
So April, a couple of questions that have come in. One, you were talking about Montenegro and the debt to China.
Yes.
How did the EU respond? Did they in fact bail them out?
They helped to bail them out. They helped them to refinance the project. So I don't know what form that refinancing took, but yes, they helped them restructure that loan.
So I think this is now a question going back to your experience with Hungary. And they're now asking the question about Hungary standing in the way of the admission of Sweden into NATO. And then they said, originally, I thought it was only Turkey that was opposing that. But as I recall, Hungary then also joined in. So if you
Right.
just respond.
Yes, Hungary has not recognized Sweden. Because the government of Sweden has taken a lot of very open and made a lot of very public negative statements about Hungary that Hungary obviously accepts the fact that there is free speech and so on. But these remarks were very, very injurious to Hungary and very insulting, and failed to reflect the fact that Hungary is a democracy. There's never been a problem with Hungary's democracy in terms of elections. Every election that they've had since since the fall of communism has been free and fair, according to the OECD. They have had multiple referendums. Anyway, there have been political attacks by the current Swedish government against Hungary, even though Sweden at the same time is looking to get into the European Union. And Hungary has asked Sweden to show respect for Hungary, and there have been no replies from Sweden about their requests. They've named certain, statements that the government itself has made. So we'll wait and see. I mean, on the other hand, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, has said multiple times that he will support it, and he is committed, I believe, to the Swedes that this fall he will try to make it happen. But it's very unpopular with parliamentarians at the moment in Hungary. They don't like Sweden taking pot shots at them that they view as unfair and politically motivated, rather than and so I think that's where that stands. But I guess I do expect that to get resolved before the end of the year. I expect so. But a lot of it will take place. A lot of it will depend on Turkey. So although Erdogan has sent to Parliament the request to approve Sweden, the Turkish Parliament has not yet voted on it. So I think that the time when the question will become more relevant and more pressing for Hungary, I don't think Orban will press the issue until the Turkish Parliament actually votes to approve Sweden's accession.
Oh, Tyler.
Yeah, now that we're on Hungary and Orban, how is he polling these days? I mean, is he as popular as he has been in the past? Is there any threat to his, stability and electability in the next election, do you think?
Well, first of all, he just got elected in 2022, and it's a 4-year term. So
okay,
so there's no immediate threat to his tenure. However, there are local elections coming up next year and European parliamentary elections coming up next spring. And the polling of Fidesz, his party is Fidesz, and the polling of Fidesz has remained fairly robust. It's not at the highest level it's ever been. And I think it's polling around 37% approval rating, something like that, which is it's rarely above 40%. It's rarely been above 40% in national polling, because there are always in former communist countries a lot of people who are asked to by a pollster, tell me what you're how are you leaning politically. They don't want to answer the question, because your political party was became a liability during certain wars. So people like to keep their party a secret.
Mhm.
So, but the bigger question, as you alluded, is the fact that he has no opposition at this point. There is no opposition.
Yeah.
To speak of, Marquis Zai, there is a person who ran against him in the last election, who was he was not affiliated with any political party, which is a problem because you really kind of need the base that kind of party provides. But he was in a coalition with the Socialist Party, and the leader still of the Socialist Party is a person named Ferenc Gyurcsány. And Ferenc Gyurcsány was the previous prime minister, previous to Viktor Orban. And he is extremely unpopular in Hungary. He remains extremely unpopular. So although, Fidesz is a little bit less than, its popularity is waning a bit. And for reasons, I mean, the economy of Hungary had been extremely strong. It had just been booming. But then when you got COVID and the Ukraine war and all the migrant stuff, its economy has been hit hard. Trade with Russia. So it's been harder for Hungary, harder for them to maintain their popularity because they haven't been able to do the kind of public spending that they had been doing previously. So it will be interesting to watch over the coming years whether they will be able to get opposition that's viable. I mean, part of the problem, part of the problem in the past election was that this Marquis Zai, his effort, his team received about over $10 million of funding from a US group that included a former Obama ambassador and, all people, Kati Marton, all people on the left, let's put it that way. But it was US dollars, and that's illegal in Hungary. So, and $10 million can actually make a difference in a small country like Hungary in the elections. So that has made people very angry at the left that they were actually taking money illegally to support their campaign.
It's intriguing while we're in that neck of the woods, what's happened next door in Slovakia. Do you take that as a suggestion that much of Eastern Europe may be turning further right and that support of Ukraine will in fact diminish? I mean, Slovakia was one of the first supporters militarily of Ukraine. So to have them suddenly cut everything off is fairly dramatic. I mean, I don't think it'll change things too much, but it's quite a message.
It is. I think the Ukraine war has been a hardship, particularly on the border states and the border states of Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Romania also. Those border states have been really hit hard by just the people coming in, and it's really, they've had to support them. It's been enormously costly for them from a humanitarian standpoint, as well as a military standpoint. And it's just, unfortunately, it's become unpopular with the people. The people no longer feel as good about, giving up their seats on the bus and to Ukrainians, and, because they feel, because their economies have become weak. Right. So it's going to be hard for those border states they've been so hard hit by that war, and they really don't have a lot. They don't have a lot of tolerance for a very long and extended war, and it appears to be turning into kind of an endless war. There doesn't seem
Yeah.
to be any peace plan. There doesn't seem to be any action by either side that seems to have the promise of resolving the war and ending it. You know, no great win, no great victory, no like we're surging and it's working. It just seems to be more and more there. People are seeing it as a stalemate and as another, seeing Ukraine turned into a frozen conflict zone.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that is a message that is resonating in the United States as well. So certainly, there are a lot of, I don't know, April, but this has not been a super optimistic, I think, discussion
Yeah,
of what's
sorry
going
about
on
that,
in the
but it's
world.
tough with the Balkans to be real upbeat, you know?
Right.
There are just too many serious threats. And that part of the world it's
No, but I think we certainly appreciate really your very much in depth,
Yeah.
discussion of
Yeah.
the West Balkans and what's going on. It's been a very, I think, confusing area, although, everyone has been aware of the conflict that's been going on. But certainly, I think having a firsthand account of your having been there very recently and hearing very personally from leaders what their hopes are for that region is very helpful. And I think promising certainly to us. So thank you.
long term, I think there is promise, yes.
Should we all
Good.
live so long, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd like to also, so I thank you on behalf of our group. To our audience, please join us again on Monday, November 13th at 10 a.m. for our next program. We will then be talking about sanctions or how trade and the U.S. security are linked. And our speaker would be Thibault Dimnamiel, who is from the International Business at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So this in a way is somewhat related also to what we've been talking about. I also, if you did not, because we had a change of time for our last program that was on Mexico and US relations and also what's going on politically internally in Mexico. I urge you to take a look at that program. It was an excellent program. You can find this program as well as very shortly our program with April on Chappaqua Library's website. I think for April's and the history that has been going on in that area, it's worth tuning in again and just sort of digesting what she was talking about in terms of the time frame, what's been going on in her analysis. So thank you very much again. So we will see you all in 2 weeks, and thank you, and to the Chappaqua Library for hosting this program, and Joan for your remarkable attention to keeping us on target and providing all the resources and facilities to help us. So
I do want to mention though, when you just said the video, the Chappaqua Library is launching a new website on the November 1st. So if you are going to look for the videos, it's really, it's more user friendly. It's still chappaqua.library.org. You will go to events, and on the right-hand side of the horizontal menu, it will say recordings, and you'll be able to find it. However, we're still refining that recordings. I want to have it broken up by foreign policy discussion groups or series and lectures. That hasn't been done because it's been quite the job, but it will be done soon. So you will have to sort of search for the past foreign policy discussion groups. But it is launching on the 1st of November, and I hope you will all go onto the site and enjoy it. Thank you. Thank you all to Ambassador Foley, to the entire planning committee. You've done a wonderful job. And Don, I hope you heal quickly. Goodbye, everyone.